I'm going to just quickly dive into the presentation, and we're going to walk through a bit about Wholesum, a bit about how to use Wholesum for menu planning. But before I do that, I just wanted to give an opportunity for folks in the room to introduce themselves, share a little bit more about where you're calling in from, what's your experience level with Wholesum, and if you have any specific questions that you're hoping that we answer today, feel free to hop into the chat to write that down. On the call today is myself and Grace Brogan. Grace, I believe you're able to chime in here as well. Grace is going to be keeping an eye on the comments there, so if you have questions as we dive in, feel free to write them in the comment section, and Grace will call them out if I don't see them myself.
I'm here. Thanks
great.
again for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, Grace.
Yeah.
And I looked through the list as y'all are chiming in the chat. I looked through the list, and it looks like we've got about 50 people joining today, and there's a pretty big range of industries and experience levels with Wholesum, which is fun to see. So we've got some people who are brand new to Wholesum and maybe haven't touched it at all, in which case we'll make sure we have some time for sort of an introduction to how it works for menu planning. We also have some current Wholesum users, so that's either people who are looking for a refresher or maybe staff that are new to an organization that's already using Wholesum. So that is welcome too. Also, it was fun to see a bit of a range in the industries that we're working with. So there are some summer camps, some whitewater outfitters I saw, a few school and university outdoor programs, outfitters, and we've got a few general like outdoor education and adventure organizations on there as well. So without further ado, let me jump forward here. If I can get my slides to move. We're the Wholesum team. I'm John Kamen. Grace Brogan's on the call with me. Grace and I founded Wholesum together in, what was it, Grace? 2016 or 2017? I can't ever seem to remember.
I think it was 2016.
Yeah, I think you're right. So coming up on 8 years now that we've been doing this with Wholesum. Grace and I both come from the outdoor and food world. So we started Wholesum in 2016 in large part because, probably like all of you, we were dealing with all of these spreadsheets trying to deal with food planning for groups, trying to get shopping lists, dealing with dietary restrictions, and realizing that there was a better way to do this that was, a way to reduce the kind of the headache of it all, reduce the time that it took to compile these lists, and also hopefully reduce food waste in the end. And it's been a fun process to kind of walk through this journey with all of you all, to add features along the way, to kind of figure out the best ways to use Wholesum in different work environments for different kinds of organizations. And I'm happy to share some of that with you today. I have a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, and then we'll dive right in, and I'll share my screen and we can jump into the actual demo. Before we do that, just a quick overview on Wholesum. I've already started sharing some of that. And then we'll move on to an introduction to basic menu planning. So if you're already familiar with Wholesum, some of this is going to be review in that second bullet. We do have a few new features that I wanted to share with you that we've rolled out in the past few months, some of which are really exciting. So I'm looking forward to introducing a few of those for you. And we'll basically give you an end-to-end view of the simplest way to use Wholesum for menu planning for groups. From there, we'll move on to focus just on dietary restrictions, because I know this is one of the areas where people struggle the most when it comes to menu planning for groups. So I want to pause there and talk through dietary restrictions. And then with whatever time we have left, in addition to whatever questions you all have or things you'd like us to focus on, we can start to dive into some of the more advanced or nuanced topics of Wholesum, the features that not every single organization is going to use, but it might be helpful for some people or useful in some circumstances. So we'll jump into those as well, and can talk about pricing and options as well at the end. So very quickly, we talked about this to some degree already. Founded in 2016. Looks like I got it right there, Grace. And yeah, we've largely been working in the outdoor sector. So there are a handful of organizations using Wholesum that aren't in the outdoor world in general, but that's largely what we built Wholesum for, and it's largely what our user base is. So that's camps, outfitting, whitewater, university outdoor programs, and schools, ranches, that sort of thing. And one fun thing that's been that we've been able to see is that it's really ranging in users from really small, mom and pop nonprofits that are doing just a few groups a year through larger international businesses that are, outfitting hundreds and hundreds of trips every season. And so there's a snapshot here of a handful of those, ranging from LL Bean's outdoor program using Wholesum REI, using it across many of their tripping centers as well, and summer camps, and some of these whitewater outfitters you see in the second and third row, leaning on Wholesum for their food planning as well. So it's been fun to see. Anything to add there, Grace? Otherwise, I'll dive right in and share my screen.
No, I think that sounds good. I might just let people know that there is on our website a user stories section. So if they are kind of curious to hear how it's impacted staff members' lives in really positive ways, that's a fun place to go if you have some time.
Perfect. All right, let's get out of the presentation mode, and I will jump right into Wholesum. So let's get some of this out of the way. Great. So that first bullet on the agenda is to basically walk through the basics of Wholesum, and that's what we're looking at right now. So what we're going to focus on here is this top row. So the first one you'll see is your recipes, your ingredients, and then your meal plans. So the idea here is that we're going to take some time up front to get our recipes set up. So you may or may not have a list of recipes that you already use to serve your groups. You can import those into Wholesum in a few ways that I'll show you. And then as you do that, it's going to make this really long list of ingredients. So those ingredients are basically all of the ingredients that you might use in any one of your recipes. And you can spend as much or as little time as you want here, but this is really a space for you to add more information about the brand that you use, or the cost of the ingredient, or what the vendor or store you purchase it from, to really make so that your shopping list is as detailed as possible. So we'll spend a little time going through that and some newer features there. And then once those two are completed, we can jump into our meal plans. So these are for our groups. So this is to say, we've got a group of 15 people coming up next week with for 4 days, and here are the meals we're going to serve, here are the dietary restrictions, and we'll jump into those as well. So once these first two are done, we'll spend most of our time talking about meal plans. So let's jump into recipes first. When you start in your free trial, this will be blank. And the first step is really to get your recipes into Wholesum. There are a few ways to do that, and I'm going to share a few of them with you right now. So one is we have this Browse Collections. This can be a really great tool even if you decide not to use Wholesum. This is a space where a lot of other organizations who are using Wholesum have offered to share their recipes with the broader outdoor community. And so you can always jump in here and pull in a recipe into your list as well. So that's a great resource if you're trying to think of ideas. It might be worth jumping in here and try to find an organization that is similar to your operations and see what they're serving. So that's a great tool. The second one is one I demoed at the last webinar, if you joined us for that, which is, and so I'll skip over it, but you're welcome to play with it. It's a fun new tool, which is to do an automatic recipe generation. So you can type any recipe name in here and it'll generate the recipe, a draft of it for you, so that you can kind of get a starting point and get a head start on doing it manually. The third one that I wanted to demo, and I know I'm running through this quickly, is the new one that I'm excited about, and that's this recipe from URL. So this is another great tool that can be helpful even if you're not using Wholesum, but it's particularly helpful if you are. And what that does, I've got it pulled up here in another window just to show you, is we have this way, we just launched this about a month ago, we have a way to basically declutter any recipe that you find out there on the internet and put it in a format that's easier to read and also easier to import into Wholesum. So as an example, I pulled up this backcountry foodie recipe for sun-dried tomato pesto pasta, and you'll see there's a bunch of personal stories and ads and things like that before we get to the actual recipe. I'm sure you all are familiar with that. What we can do with this tool, which is really helpful, And there's a little bookmark bar that you can put on here to just click a button and declutter it. Is we can just click that button and get the instructions and get the ingredients pulled in right here. So this is a really great way. I'm showing it to you when I'm not logged into Wholesum. So this is just free and accessible to anyone. But if we're logged into Wholesum, that same process then adds one helpful step. So this is me logged in to my Wholesum account. And when I pull this in, what it'll do now is actually start the process of comparing what is the ingredient here in the recipe and what ingredients that might be similar do I have in other recipes. And the hope here is really so that we can end up with a really streamlined and consistent shopping list so that we don't end up with penne pasta and all these duplicate names, garlic, cloves of garlic, garlic cloves, those sorts of things to really get redundant. So this will walk you through the process of determining each one. Is this the same recipe ingredient or is this a different one? Is pieces of sun-dried tomato the same or different? Let's go with different. Pine nuts, new, great. Basil, we already have basil. Let's go with the existing ingredient. So that's an example of kind of how when you import it, it's going to try to really align with your existing recipes that are in here. So those are some ways to sort of start building your base of recipes. For many organizations, even though it takes a little bit more time, creating the recipes manually is actually your best step because it really puts the control in your hands to define the name of the ingredient, the units that we're going to use, and really spell out what is it that we're doing here. So just as an example, let's jump into bagels and cream cheese and take a look at this recipe. So it's a recipe for bagels and cream cheese. I'm saying this is a recipe for 10 people. Now this will scale up and scale down later when we get to meal plans. So you don't need to worry too much about this as long as the quantities in the recipe match to the number of individuals served up here, the servings per recipe. So in this case, I've got 1 package of cream cheese and 10 whole bagels. We can add as many other ingredients as we want to. One thing I like to highlight here at this step is this substitute column. So this is going to be an important part of our conversation about dietary restrictions. But I can click this, let's say for bagels, and we can see that I can start to create some rules and say, if somebody has a wheat or gluten intolerance, I'm going to substitute 10 whole bagels for 10 whole gluten-free bagels. And we'll see in the final step that this will start to interact with the dietary restrictions in any specific group so that we bring the right amount of substitutes in the end. There are a few other details we can add here that I won't spend too much time on, but we can flag it for any dietary restrictions in addition to the ones that we've already substituted. We can add instructions, categorize it here, and we can use these custom tags to say, this is a recipe that we use in the back country versus a recipe we use in the front country, or we use this in the winter and this in the summer. So you can start to add some custom tags to keep things organized there. So that as a whole is your recipes. What you'll end up with is this list of, the 10, 20, 30, 100 recipes that you serve to your groups on a regular basis. And we can go from there.
Can I just hop in really quick?
Yeah.
And this page that you just turned to is really helpful to see that. So like John mentioned at the beginning, this is just that first step. You can see my recipes and then ingredients and meal plans. And that was a lot of information that he went over, but it's also just a variety of ways that we have found to be helpful to build out that kind of core first piece of what you'll be doing from here on out. So again, that takes a little setup like any new database, and the more control over it that you have, the stronger and easier it'll be from there on out. But once it's done, it's in there, and you can always update it, refine it. But it's kind of that upfront work whenever you're kind of starting your database to get that information in there. And John's went over those ways that we found some people like to make it easier or try out other people's recipes. But it's that kind of first step of three. It feeds into that next step, which is ingredients. And then once you have that done, once you've kind of done your setup and really gotten the strength of the recipes that you want in there, on a day-to-day basis from there on out, you'll be spending most of your time in meal plans, and there we'll get there in a bit. But just to say, it will be really smooth and straightforward. So there's this setup step at the beginning, like with anything. But once you have that in there, things move pretty quickly, and you'll see that soon.
Yeah, that's great. And you can think of it as something like an iterative process, so that as you learn that you're always coming back with extra bagels, you can come in there and adjust your recipes, and it'll really start to make your meal plans more and more accurate. So it's, yeah, that's great context. Thanks, Grace. Let's jump to ingredients real fast. I won't spend too much time here, but as I built out those recipes, this list has been automatically created. So this is a list of all of the ingredients that are in all of my recipes. So for example, if I jump to that bagels and cream cheese one, we'll see those ones that are there. Or I can jump back to all recipes. And this is really that place that I mentioned where you can start to spell out what is the store or vendor that I purchase it from. Do I want to define the department where I purchase it? The idea is that we'll be able to spit out shopping lists for specific stores or sorted by department, or really get our shopping list and packing list refined based on the information we put in here. We have a general notes field that we can put in. And the new this year feature that I wanted to highlight was this ingredient info panel. And so I can open this up, and it gives us even more detail. So this is a place where I can spell out what brand of bagels do we typically buy. If I'm using a vendor or purchasing online, do I have a specific URL or an item number that I can flag here? All of this can be pulled in to and linked from the shopping list. We can also spell out the aisle. Even some organizations are using aisle as their primary sorting, so that they can run to the local grocery store, have the list sorted by aisle, and really just run up and down the aisles in the right order to get the right quantities as quickly as possible. So all these are completely optional. You don't have to spend time adding this information if you don't want to, but it can be really helpful.
Just to add to that,
yeah.
one of the things I feel like we hear a lot that maybe new users don't always expect is just how much time it saves staff members. So they can focus that time on other things that often are more in their wheelhouse. So that's just an example of how people can choose to use it in different ways, but really how it does affect everybody's day-to-day experience.
Yeah. For those of you that are using Wholesum already, one feature that you might find helpful that also was rolled out here in the last 6 months or so is the ability to merge ingredients. So if ever I needed to, this is not a good example, but if ever I needed to merge two ingredients because they were duplicates, we added an ability here to merge those, which is something we can talk more about later if folks have questions. But it's a way to basically keep your ingredient list really clean and managed. Okay, let's jump to meal plans. So we've built out our recipes, we've added some details to the ingredients, and now it's time to build out our meal plans. So these are the meals for our groups. And what we're going to see here, this is my demo account, but on the left are a bunch of folders that we can use to keep things organized and just drag and drop meal plans into the appropriate groups. And on the right are the specific groups. So each one of these is a different group that might be either coming for a visit or going out on a trip, depending on the work that you do. Let's start with this one that I just preloaded to save a little time. You can always just add a new meal plan from scratch here, and I'll show you what that looks like. It's just going to be blank and we can jump in here, but I took a little bit of time this morning to give us a little head start. So here's the December webinar meal plan. That's the name of this group. In this case, I'm going to say there are 22 people. And you can do that by appetite size if you want. So it'll scale, it'll kind of inflate it or deflate it if you decide you've got a group of big eaters or some really little kids coming on the trip. You can apply a little bit of inflating or deflating it there, but we'll just say we've got 22 normal appetite folks. Can add some details here if we want to. This is a great place for noting specific requests or restrictions or allergies from members of the group if you have them. And then we'll get down to dietary restrictions. So this is a place to say, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but this is a place to say, of those 22, how many of them do not eat eggs or fish or soy? So I've said I've got a few that don't do gluten and dairy and shellfish, and we can go from there. This list is also customizable, which I can show you later. And then this is our meal plan. So this can be done by date. I put in the following dates here, saying that it's a 4-day trip. You can do it by day numbers if that's better for you. And then on the left, we have all those recipes we created in that first step. And on the right is our menu planning grid. So we can come in here and say, let's look at our lunch options and start moving these into whatever category we want to. We can filter it by, whatever pieces we've put on there, tags we put on there. If we want to add multiples to one piece, we can. We can change these headers if you'd like to, so it's like appetizer and dinner or whatever order you'd like it to be in. So you can really build out the list that you have here. On the left, I'll call out a few things. One is this little triangle is flagging for us that this recipe might contain a potential conflict with one of the dietary restrictions we entered above. So if we haven't accounted for that with one of the rules, for example, then we need to pay attention. And then on the left, it's quite small, but you'll be able to see whether this has been served already or if it's been served multiple times. You'll be able to see that here so that you can make sure that you are adding a lot of variety to the meal plan. And then the last step here, I'll scroll down, is this is the list of all of the meals that we just added. And it's assuming that everybody is eating everything. And if that's not true for some reason, because you've got members of the group leaving early or coming late, or you're serving 2 different menu options, this is a tool where you can scale back and say, actually the whole group is not eating these meals for some reason. And this is our meal plan. So there are a few ways to view this. We have a spreadsheet that I'll download to show you. You can view it here on the website. We also have a iPhone and Android app that you can use. But I will start with the PDF, because this is often the most comprehensive view of the meal plan. And what we've got here is the full list of all of the shopping or packing list that we'll need for that full group. You'll see that it's going to be combined across multiple meals. So for example, eggs, we're using eggs in this meal, in this meal, and in this meal. And this is the total number of eggs based on the recipes we made and based on the group size. It's coming out with this, 84 whole eggs. This is a little bit of a funny unit, and so if this is bothersome to you, we have some rules in place that we can turn on to round these appropriately so that it always rounds to the nearest whole. We can also do some conversions. So if you don't want this to show up in whole eggs and you want it to show up in dozens, we have a tool that we can share to do that as well. You'll see that I've got it set to sort by store and then by department second. So this is something you can change, but that's a good sort of standard way to do it. And we'll see, 11 onions across these recipes, just as an example. So here's our shopping list. You can also customize which columns show up on this if you don't want to see any of these, if you don't need metric, for example. We'll get our meal plan for the week, so here's our 4 days and our different meals. You'll also see the number of individuals being served each meal. And then the last thing that we'll get is the actual recipes. So here we've got bagels and cream cheese. You'll see that it's automatically doing the substitute here for the individuals that aren't doing wheat or gluten. If we've added instructions, it will carry those in and it'll scale the recipe to the appropriate size, the number of people being served here. So you might remember from that original bagels and cream cheese recipe that it was a recipe built for 10 people. And now we're looking at what that recipe looks like for 22 people. So it's really well scaled there. And then let me just pull up quickly to show it. Looks like it came over on another screen. Here's what it looks like in Excel. So really similar, but this is a great option if you want to make a few manipulations or you want to edit it on the fly. Excel can be a really helpful way to do that. And then if it's helpful, you'll also notice that it's broken down by day. So you can see the ingredients that are needed each day. And then this is the full list of each one. So that is meal plans as a whole. Maybe I'll pause there to see if there are any questions. If you have questions, feel free to add them into the chat, or we can keep cruising.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Rachel Ratliff asked a few minutes ago, can there be two groups listed for the same dates?
Yes, you can list two groups for the same dates. You can do, as many as you need to, as many dates. There's no limitation on the number of meal plans, the number of individuals, overlapping dates. You can do all those things. You might see these two dates are overlapping here in this sample. And then similarly, I'm not sure if this is where we're going with the question, but let's imagine that we have two groups that are going out on the same dates. In fact, I can even take this meal plan and clone it. So now we've got an exact copy of it, which is often a good strategy if you have a lot of trips or groups that are being fed similar meal plans. And we can adjust these and change the number of individuals and dietary restrictions on each one of them. But I can also pull them together. So this green button is a really helpful one. And it allows me to say, okay, I'm shopping for both of these groups now. And it will then pull a combined shopping list. So that allows you to shop for one group if that's the strategy that you want to employ, or if you've got multiple groups coming in a short period of time, you can shop for multiple ones of those.
If this seems like a lot of information, that's because it is. When we started Wholesum in 2016, as we determined at the top of the hour, it was pretty simple. But like John mentioned, thanks to all of you, we've continued to add all of these little tweaks to make as much sense as possible for all of our users. So there's a spectrum of ease to go into it with. We can make it pretty simple and straightforward, and we're generally doing that with a few peeks into more complicated options. But there are also a lot of small tweaks that, as people dig into more detailed work, if needed for their operation, it's available as well. So just putting it out there that it is a lot of information we're sharing right now. Continue to ask questions. There is a spectrum of ways to use it, from quite simple to more complicated, based on the needs of your organization. And we have, in addition to us being available to hop on a call with you as needed, we have a lot of helpful resources on the website as well. Just to throw that out there, because I know it's a lot of information.
Yeah, thank you. And I think one of the things that's been a fun process over the years for us is that I think when Grace and I started this originally, we were maybe a little bit naive in how consistent menu planning was across these organizations. Having seen it in a number of organizations, we built a pretty simple and straightforward tool that I've demoed most of that to you now. And as we've gained users over the last decade or so, it's just become so apparently clear that everybody does this differently. Everybody has different vendors that they purchase from. They have different durations. They have different dietary restrictions and ways of packing and ways of purchasing. And what that has turned into then for us is means that it's become a really flexible tool. So there are a lot of little features and tricks to using Wholesome that we can either choose to use or not use depending on kind of how your business works. And we can get into. I've already shared some of that with you, and we can get into more of it as we continue here.
A follow-up question, John, before we
Yeah,
move on.
yeah.
With a Wholesome subscription, can more than one person access the account at a time? For example, if someone is out on a program with participants and the office staff receives information about dietary restrictions for an upcoming group, can they edit that trip's information?
Yeah, there is one. So there's one login that you will get for your Wholesome account, and if you are comfortable sharing the login information at your organization, then that there's no limitation on the ability of multiple people to use that even at the same time. So there's no concerns there. Many organizations choose to go that route. We do have a multiple users feature that I'll jump into here, and we can talk more about this later if you'd like, but I'm looking at the settings now just as an example. You can see that I've got most things off right now, and we can talk through some of these later, but this multiple users feature is an optional piece that really is meant to narrow what a user can do. So if you do have field staff that you plan on having log in, or seasonal staff or interns or even clients, you can set up their permissions here for an additional cost. And so this is really to say, I want my users to be able to log in, but I don't want them to be able to delete or edit my recipes. I just want them to be able to edit existing meal plans, and or even just meal plans in this folder. So you can get really, really granular here.
And that generally is so people can edit as needed, but also can't like mess up your very well refined meal plans
Yeah,
that you've worked a
exactly.
lot on. So it's for ease of use and it's for maintaining the structure that you've developed while still giving access to other people. Um,
Yeah,
I have another question that came up,
sure.
and then I can maybe let you return to
No, no
your.
worries. This is great. These are things I was hoping to cover anyway, so we're good.
Jenna is wondering if there is a fridge or pantry feature for ingredients that have already been purchased or have been left over from a previous trip.
Yeah, like an inventory tool or something like that. There is not right now an inventory feature with Wholesome. It's one of the questions that we get periodically. So it's on our minds for sure. I have seen a few different strategies for handling this challenge. So one of them is to lean heavily on the spreadsheet. So if you are keeping an active spreadsheet of your inventory, then it's not terribly difficult to connect the dots and cross-reference these in various ways between the shopping list and the inventory to flag, to do a lookup and then flag what's available. So that's one option I've seen people use. Another one that takes a little bit more active management is I have seen organizations that come into the ingredients page, and where the store is defined, they use this sort of as their tool to manage their inventory. So anytime there's excess of one product found, or there was a bunch of things purchased in advance of the season that are put in dry storage or something like that, they would shift the store to pantry or to storage or inventory or whatever makes sense for you, so that it's the store that shows up on the shopping list is the the pantry or the storage, so that the person doing the collecting or purchasing knows, okay, I don't need to buy this from Albertsons or Costco. I need to go get this out of a storage unit. So that's a really effective way to do it. It takes a little bit more active management to make sure that you're keeping this list up to date.
Yeah, and I think those are great options about how to navigate that. As you've kind of heard, we are always trying to um, make Wholesome as functional for our users as possible. But sometimes the complexity of how every different organization uses it makes adding those features complex. So inventory is one thing where we have found these options and workarounds for now while we navigate a way that would make sense for the majority of users. And we're not quite there yet on that.
Yeah. Great. I'll keep cruising here. Unless there are other questions that hop up, feel free to interrupt, Grace, if you see something. I did want to spend a little bit of time on dietary restrictions. And we've talked about some of this, so I won't, I'll try not to be too repetitive here, but there are so many, dietary restrictions is one of the most challenging parts of this work, I think, that people are really struggling with, and it keeps increasing in frequency and prevalence. And there are, where I've landed on this, and everybody takes their own strategy, but where I've landed on this is basically 3 different ways to handle dietary restrictions that I've bulleted here. And there might be more nuance to this, but generally speaking, these are the 3 ways that we've built it into Wholesum. So one is the common denominator. So this one, the example I put here is that we have a peanut allergy, and so we just want to make sure we're not bringing anything with any nuts on the for this group at all. We're just going to avoid it completely. Nobody in this group is eating nuts. The second one is a meal substitution strategy, which is really to say, okay, well, we're serving, pasta with meatballs for dinner, but if you are gluten-free or you're vegetarian, we're going to serve this other, rice-based meal over here. It has nothing to do with pasta. It's not that we're substituting ingredients. We're just serving 2 completely different meal options. And then the third is this ingredient substitution option, which I think is becoming pretty common these days. And this is more to say, we have that bagel and cream cheese recipe, and everybody's going to still have bagels and cream cheese, but we might do gluten-free bagels for those that don't do gluten. And we might do cream cheese alternative for people who are dairy-free. And to really build a build your own solution here where we have a lot of different options. Everybody's eating the same thing, but we might substitute ingredients in that meal. And so I wanted to quickly walk through a few tools in place for Wholesum to deal with these 3 strategies. And we've already seen bits of them, so this should look somewhat familiar. So common denominator, this is the one where we're going to just exclude recipes that contain certain ingredients. There's one really simple way to do this, and that is this doesn't contain filter here. So if I ever want to get rid of, if I say wheat or gluten, or let's do tree nuts, if we want to filter this list and get rid of any recipes that have tree nuts, I can just do that, and now the recipe has been filtered. If I want to get rid of anything with dairy, I can do that, and now it'll get rid of those ones that have dairy in them. And so you can really just refine the list, and that's sort of the first step of meal planning, is saying, just don't even show me the recipes that have the following ingredients in them. So that's a really great way to do that. And as long as you've got your recipes flagged correctly, then it'll filter it out for you that way. So coming back to option 2, which is this meal substitution. The tool to use this I've already showed you, and that is let's do an example down here where we've got spaghetti and meatballs for dinner, and maybe we want to do, I'll use this little search tool here. We'll do rice and beans as the substitute here. Maybe a boring alternative, but it'll work for our purposes. And so what I can do now is to say, we're not going to substitute ingredients. Instead, what we're going to do is we've got spaghetti and meatballs here and rice and beans here. And I'm going to just say, 15 people or 12 people are doing spaghetti and meatballs, and 10 people are doing rice and beans. And so this is a way of serving 2 completely different meal options, which can be really helpful in your, if you've got a lot of different dietary restrictions you need to work with, or you have specific separate vegan menus, for example, or vegan recipes that you want to use. this is a really great way of just adding multiples to the same meal and then serving them separately. The final option then is that the substitute ingredients one, and this one I shared with you at the beginning as well. But just as a reminder, what this looks like is to come into the recipe and actually set up that substitution rule. And we can say, okay, if somebody doesn't do the following allergen, we're going to do a substitute ingredient instead. And that will show up then on the, on the final shopping list as it interfaces with this slider here. So the more people with wheat or gluten intolerance, the more substitutes it will bring, and the fewer here and the fewer substitutes it will bring. So those are some great tools for dietary restrictions. And again, it's kind of a choose your own path here based on your own operations and what you need for the moment. Any questions there? Or otherwise I can keep running with it. Okay, no problem. Let's take a moment so we've talked about kind of the intro to basic menu planning. We've talked about dietary restrictions. Let's talk a little bit about some of the more advanced features in here. And I'll give kind of a quick overview of some of them, and we can dive in to any if you have questions. Otherwise, there's a lot of great resources on our website to kind of jump into any of these if you decide you're interested after the fact. So let's talk about exporting meal plans. This is maybe the most commonly used of the features that is in this category of more advanced. And what you'll find here is if I jump to my settings, there's a lot that we can do here. And I'm going to jump down to export customizations, but we can walk through some of these other ones as well. So what this one does is, you might remember when I was showing you the final meal plan, we had a PDF and Excel button. And now that this is turned on, that just changed to this export meal plan. And we can still export from PDF to PDF and Excel, but we get a few more options here now. So for example, we can export just a list for Costco, or just the list for Costco in a specific department. We can, if we don't need the calendar or the recipe details, we can just look at the shopping list, and we can really hone in our list here so that if you've got 4 or 5 vendors, you can just pull the list, and send one to vendor 1 and have a person run to the grocery store for vendor 2 and whatever you need to really refine this. So that can be a really, really helpful tool. You can also do it by date. So if you have a 10-day trip that has a restock in the middle, you can pull the list for those first 5 days and then pull the list for the second 5 days based on the dates. So there's a lot of power to this export. I'll just note too that you can do this with this combined list, which I shared, I think, in answer to Rachel's question. If I've got that turned on, it's the same features are here for us to pull from multiple shopping lists by store. Or just as an example, we could pretend that this December webinar meal plan is a standard template meal plan for our groups. It's maybe a group of, we could pretend it's a 5-day backpacking trip. And maybe we know that we run 15 of those in the summer, but we don't know the details on the exact quantities or dietary restrictions, but we need to buy some things ahead of time. We can use this tool to say, okay, well, I know I have about 15 of this and I need to buy my bulk items in advance. So maybe I'll purchase all of my bulk items now ahead. I don't know if I have any ingredients flagged with this, but I can pull it ahead of time to really get a quantity for the whole season so that I can purchase my bulk items ahead of season rather than purchasing them trip by trip or group by group. So that can be a really great tool for planning if you're doing some pre-season planning. The only other thing I'll add to export settings as a nice feature is this one here. will just allow us to really turn on which columns we want to see. So I've got some turned on and some turned off, but for PDF and Excel, we can turn any of these on or off. We can change how things are sorted. We can change how the PDF is compiled, and a few other settings in here. So there's a lot to play with there. Any other questions at that point? Otherwise, I can keep running. So we talked a little bit about these, the export customizations. Let's talk about ingredient rounding quickly. This is a fast one. So ingredient rounding, if we want to, we can turn that on. You might have seen some of those funny, 37.25 onions or something like that. We can turn this on, and what this will enable optionally is for those ingredients that are not really weight or volume based, we can turn on there's this rounding column available now. So we can say, you know what, we don't ever need partial peppers to show up on the recipe. We should just always round up or always round to the nearest whole. And so that'll really clean up those shopping lists to be a little bit cleaner and to avoid the fractions. And we can choose to do that either at the recipe level or at the shopping list level, or both, from the settings here by turning these on and off. The last one that I was hoping to run through was, we talked about multiple users a bit. I was hoping to talk about batch recipes very quickly. This may or may not be helpful for you, but if you have recipes that are like Dutch oven recipes, a lot of our whitewater outfitting users use Dutch oven recipes, or if you do a lot of baking like cakes or breads, this is a tool basically to scale the recipe a little bit differently. If this is not relevant to you, you can completely ignore this. It's not something you need to wrap your head around. But you can imagine a loaf of bread, and if you're serving bread you're baking bread for your group, it's not that you're going to want to make an infinitely larger and larger loaf of bread the more and more people show up for your group. You're going to do this in batches. You'll say, okay, I'm going to make 2 loaves of bread, or I'm going to make 3 loaves of bread, or 4 loaves of bread. And so the recipe will scale by doubling. And so if you have recipes like that, breads, cakes, Dutch oven recipes, this is a tool that's meant for that. And the only thing that it will need to think about when we do this is to turn it on, and then for those recipes that scale in that kind of different way, like this Dutch oven lasagna as an example, I can turn it on for that recipe. We're getting pretty into the weeds here, so again, not trying to overwhelm the new folks if this is too much to take in. But by turning this on, what this will do is, now that if we have a group that is, for example, 5 people, it's going to serve this standard 10 serving recipe. If we have 8 people, it's same exact recipe. And the second we get to 11 people, once we get to 11 people, it's going to double this. And now it's going to be 2 Dutch oven lasagna recipes, 2 batches. So it kind of scales by doubling. This tool can also be used, so I hope that makes sense. This can also be used for, I see it used pretty often for staples. So if you have groups that are going out and you pack up cook kits, for example, so maybe you always bring a spice kit and salt and pepper shakers and a bottle of olive oil, or specific, even physical, utensils or pots and pans or things like that. If it's a fixed amount and doesn't change based on the number of people in the group, I have seen individuals or organizations make these staples recipes that use that batch tool to really just kind of lock a specific quantity in place so that you can add it to the plan, and it's not going to scale up and down based on every every individual that you add to the group. It'll just sort of bring a fixed amount. So that can be another really helpful tool. I think that's a good place for us to pause, to make sure we have a little bit of space for questions, and I can jump into the kind of pricing and options. Grace, are there any other questions that have popped up in the meantime that I've missed?
There are no other questions right now, although if you're thinking about them, you're welcome to still enter them. One thing I was wondering if you could do, just kind of as a means of refreshing review
Yeah.
is um, let's assume I'm a relatively new user. I already entered my recipes, whether I imported them or borrowed some from users who have chosen to share them, or maybe I took a week during a quiet late winter in the office to really dial in our favorite recipes, and now they're just in there. We have that groundwork taken care of. What will most of my time look like from here on out when the busy summer comes? Just to help people imagine what things look like because we've shared so much
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, I know I've thrown a lot out there. Yeah, so we've built out our recipes, we've added some ingredient details. So most of our time at that point is going to be spent in this meal plans. It's going to be saying, all right, I know I have a group coming up, you know, holiday week group, and then building out the meal plans of the specific, you know, 15 people, dietary restrictions in that group. Oops, let's get this going. There we go. The dietary restrictions in that group, you know, any dates, any meals that you have, and then pulling that shopping list for for that group. So it's as easy as that to just, you know, this is obviously a really quick one with just a few meals as part of it, but just pulling these lists so that you've got your shopping lists made tailored for each group.
That's just, I don't know. We've been doing this with you for 8 years now, but it's just amazing that once all of that groundwork is done, it really just changes what a daily experience is like. So thank you for running through that really quick.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and we can talk through the nuances of it all. It's a little bit different for each organization, but there's at the end of the day, it's meant to be to streamline things. So you kind of use the features and tools that you want to use to make it move quickly for you. With the final few minutes, let me just jump to the pricing tab to talk through this to the degree that it's helpful for folks. You know, this is available on the pricing page here. We do have a 30% off deal available for first time users. So if you're a new organization wanting to try Wholesum in 2025, I'll follow up with some information about that after the call. And what I want to highlight here is we basically have 3 tiers. We've talked through a lot of these features today. I think we've touched on most of these. And so you'll get a sense of like which of those features that we highlighted today are ones that you think would be worthwhile for you and your organization. And then, so the first question is sort of which tier is most helpful. And then you can choose to do monthly or annual. So you'll find it's a little bit cheaper per month if you're paying for the full year. This is billed annually. Or you can do monthly. And what that means is if you're a seasonal operation, you can, you know, sign up, get your account set up, use it for the season, and then pause it at the end of the season so that it will no longer charge your card. And then when the next season rolls around and you're ready to use it again, you can start it up again. So you can use it just for the months that you need it. It's
You
easy
won't
to,
lose any information. The information will still be stored there. We
yeah,
do find some people like it to have it for a couple of months in their off months or in the run-up months, just so they can do that kind of groundwork. But it really allows for a lot of flexibility that way.
yeah. And it's front and center here to manage it. So it's not, you know, hidden in the background anywhere. You can just pause and restart it when you need to. I'll mention too that there is a 2-week free trial. So if you're new to Wholesum and you want to just try out all the features, you'll get a free trial of the enterprise level. And that is available without any credit cards or anything like that. You'll just go to sign up and fill this little form out and you'll get a free enterprise account for 2 weeks. And then you can use that trial account to, you can either start a new one if you decide to want to subscribe, or you can use that trial one to start building it out and then just upgrade when you feel like it's the right time. I think that was everything I had planned. We talked through we're right on time, 3 minutes left. If there are any last minute questions, I'm happy to tackle them. Otherwise, I wanted to leave this here. So this is my contact information. You can reach out anytime. We will send out a recording of this webinar as well for you to access if you want to revisit it at some time. And then we just wanted to make sure that you knew we're available for questions. And yeah, if there are other organizations out there that you think might benefit from this, please do spread the word. That's the main way that we grow, and the main way that we connect with other organizations and industries is through word of mouth. So appreciate you spreading the word if you see an opportunity to do that. I'll hang out with Grace here for a few more minutes to see if there are questions. Otherwise, thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
Thanks for taking the time.